It was heated at times, and the time dragged on. A marathon meeting as City Council finally approved a budget in Jacksonville. We're going to dive into the details of what's in the fine print and what got scrapped so the final vote would pass. Plus, Florida's Agriculture Commissioner joins me as his efforts bear fruit in taking drugs off store shelves across the state. Wilton Simpson and Chris Hand of This Week in Jacksonville. Glad you're with us today. After more than 13 hours of intense debate, the Jacksonville City Council officially passed the city's $2 billion budget. Council also voted to cut property tax, and those cuts are worth about $13 million. It was a long night and into the morning for council members. They finally finished that Tuesday meeting about 4:30 Wednesday in the a.m. And joining us right now, Chris Hand, government law attorney, former chief of staff of the city of Jacksonville. I was asking about whether it was predictable that this meeting would go so long. I don't know any of us circled 4:30 a.m. Wednesday on the calendar, but we knew it was kind of going to be intense. Well, Kent, these budget nights often go long. They can be contentious. This one had the effect of being both, it was both long and contentious. Probably partially, and because it did go as long as it did in those early morning hours, tempers can flare at these contentious council meetings. But it was, and the city now has a $2 billion budget that will take effect on December the 1st. It did contain a 1/8 millage cut, a 1% millage cut, which will remove about $13.5 million from the budget. The average property owner will probably see about a $20 savings over the next year from that millage cut. But there was some balance on budget night as well, because even though there was a millage cut that reduced revenue by $13 million, there were some fairly major spending initiatives that were restored to the budget. Number one was about close to $1 million for affordable housing, another $700,000 for community health clinics like Agape Health in the community, and also about $400,000 for the City of Jacksonville's membership in the Northeast Florida Regional Council, which is our regional planning council. That was a real priority of the Jacksonville Fire Rescue Department, of the town of Baldwin, because of what they do in terms of disaster preparedness, natural disaster mitigation, economic development, a variety of other tasks. So what we saw on budget night, even though it was long and even though it was contentious, we saw something that often happens on budget night, is a lot of back and forth, some compromise, ultimately some balance leading to the final budget being passed. And you just talked about some of the funding being restored for various things. Does that negate the arguments that came from City Hall saying you're trying to take away important services? You mentioned the health care, some other things like that. Well, there were certainly things that did not get funded fully as a result of that property tax cut, but what you saw was some give and take on the part of council members, knowing that they had less revenue to provide, still managing to find through a variety of different funding sources ways to fund some of these other priorities that some council members had articulated. That's why, even though there was a series of very close votes throughout the night, a 10-9 vote to pass the millage, a 10-9 vote to remove the so-called diamond amendments from the bill, the ultimate budget was passed 15-2, largely because of some of that compromise that occurred during the evening. And let's talk about that Diamond Amendment. So one of the city council members, Rory Diamond, his amendment was about prohibiting funding of certain things. A lot of those we would talk about DEI or illegal immigrants, some things like that. Controversial, but why did it change? It took another Republican on the council saying, I'm not going to vote for it, right? Well, there was a variety of factors. This was Councilman Rory Diamond, who had introduced these amendments at various points in the budget process that were basically policy statements that would prohibit the city from spending money on abortion services or undocumented immigrants or on so-called diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI. There was some controversy about these because the budget didn't actually spend any money on these things. And so there was substantive controversy about whether that should be in the budget, since those weren't spending items in the budget, whether that was appropriate. There were people both pro and con some of the language he'd recommended. But there was also a procedural issue, Kent. It's been an article of faith for decades among council members that the only thing that should be in a budget is recording the revenue that comes in and directing the expenditures that go out. For years, their position has been there shouldn't be anything operational or organizational or policy-oriented in the budget. So there was also some debate among the council about these amendments.
both the state government and the federal government often put in what's called proviso language into their budgets, which is kind of like context to some of their spending items. That really doesn't happen at the local level. This amounted to that kind of proviso language or policy direction. Ultimately, initially that amendment passed 10-9. It then became clear that with those amendments in the budget, it simply didn't have the numbers to pass. So Councilman Will Lanin from District 3, at that very late hour you referenced, decided to change his vote. The amendments were out of the budget, and then the budget proceeded to passage.
Yeah. So it seemed unusual to me, and maybe you can provide some context on this, that the state got involved. The state's CFO, Blazin Golia, came to Jacksonville, started talking about Jacksonville's budget. Hey, you've overspent here and that sort of thing. We're not seeing that just in Jacksonville. We see it in Orlando, other places around the state. How do we, I guess, comprehend or reconcile this state effort to get into local municipalities?
Well, a couple of ways. First, obviously, Florida launched its own DOGE effort after the federal government launched its DOGE effort after President Trump took office in January. So as a result of that, I suspect the DOGE effort in Florida is trying to find some ways they can identify potential savings, efficiencies, ways to cut government. But there's an even bigger issue, Kent, which is, and I know we'll talk more about this, but the state government right now is trying to propose ways to cut property taxes in general. I suspect part of this is an effort to gather evidence with different local governments, evidence that there's overspending happening and that property taxes can be cut because local governments, allegedly don't need that level of revenue. So as you say, the state DOGE team visited Jacksonville, Orange County, this past week in Alachua County in Florida. They've been to other parts of the state as well, Manatee County down in Southwest Florida. So they're visiting a variety of city and county governments around the state, trying to make the case that city and county governments collect too much money and property taxes should be reduced in advance of what is an overall state effort to address the property tax issue.
So I'll tell you what, so we'll take a commercial break and then come back to that, because definitely we want to get more into that. But we're also going to be looking at the local issue concerning the location of Duval County's school board headquarters. Stay with us. That's next on This Week in Jacksonville.
You're watching This Week in Jacksonville with Kent Justice.
And this is our monthly Hand on Government segment. Chris Hand with us, and wanted to talk a little bit more. You just mentioned it a moment ago, but there's an effort in the state to look at reducing or eliminating property tax. How would that work? And I know on the legislative side, there are meetings already for a property tax committee in the House and those sorts of things.
Well, that's right, Ken. It would require a constitutional amendment. Property taxes are enshrined in the state constitution, so it would require an amendment on the November ballot, any significant change to that. And remember, in Florida, we pass our constitutional amendments with a supermajority, so it would require 60% plus one to pass. There is not a specific proposal yet, but as you say, the legislature is now beginning to examine that, starting with this 37-member Florida House committee on property taxes. Now remember, there's 120 members in the Florida House, so essentially a third of the Florida House is on this committee. They've just started their work in the past week. They're beginning to examine a variety of options. Governor DeSantis has floated a couple. He had at one point one idea, an $1,000 rebate for every property taxpayer. Then he talked about sort of the idea of maybe getting rid of property taxes for homestead property in the state. There have even been some proposals to eliminate it altogether. This is going to be a very controversial issue in the 2026 legislative session, which starts in January, largely because this would have a massive fiscal impact on local communities, cities, counties, school boards. The Florida Policy Institute has done a study. If you eliminated property taxes altogether, that would be a $50 billion impact on local governments in Florida. Just to put that in some local framing, Kent, City of Jacksonville's budget is $2 billion. 1.2 million of that is from property taxes. If you eliminated it outright, the city's budget would be more than half. If you just eliminated property taxes on homestead property, that would be a $400 million impact, or about a fifth of the budget. This is of great concern to local governments like cities, counties, and school boards, because property taxes fund core services, things like police, fire, parks, public works. In the case of school districts, teachers' salaries, instructional materials, these real core services. So there's a lot of concern at the local level about how would one replace that revenue if a change occurred. And so we're going to see a lot of discussion about this in Tallahassee over the next few months.
For people who live in Florida are already enjoying no income tax in the state, how could the state manage with no property tax as well? Let me also ask about this. You mentioned property tax, certainly important for local school boards. Duval County Public Schools, they've been looking at, and we've heard they've even got an agreement to sell the headquarters on the South Bank, move that headquarters down into another part of town off Bay Meadows. What are you hearing about this? Because I saw some recent reporting that there were other offers, including maybe even a land swap there on the South Bank, that the school board either didn't know about or didn't choose.
Well, both WJXT and Jacksonville Today, one of its news partners, have done sort of extensive reporting on this issue. There were a series of proposals that came into the school board for potential consideration. The preferred proposal, the one that the superintendent has recommended, is from Fleet Landing, the retirement community that currently has obviously facilities kind of out on the beach, wants to build 2 high-rises on the South Bank. They've made an offer to the school board of either $17 million now or $20 million with those payments divided over time. School board has not made a decision on that. In fact, there are 5 of the 7 members who have been asking a variety of questions about the kind of divided nature of the payments, some of the real estate commissions involved. So this is merely a proposal at this point. But if this were to pass and the Fleet Landing were to buy this, the school board would then take some of those revenues and buy a new facility on the south side, down kind of at Bay Meadows and I-95 in the Prominence Office Park. That would cost about $14 million. So the upside for the school district, for those who are proponents of this, is that it would generate potentially some capital for the school board at a time when they are very cash strapped, like school districts across the state are. Those who are critics tend to say, well, hang on, our school district headquarters should be closer to downtown in the center of the city. This moves it out further, maybe not as good public transportation to the site. So there's going to be a lot of back and forth. I think this is going to be a pretty intense discussion as the school board continues to consider what its future home will be. Is
it possible, because as you're pointing out, this is the preferred path for the superintendent, but could the school board choose one of those other offers that may have come in?
They could certainly reject this offer and choose to negotiate with one of the other bidders if they wanted to do that, or throw out the whole process and start all over again. I mean, from their perspective, they do have a building now that they own. They've been there for 45 years. Yeah. They've been searching for the past decade or so for a new home and haven't quite found the right one yet. So this seems to be the closest they've ever gotten to selling their headquarters and moving to a new one, but it does require the approval of a majority of the school board. They're not there yet, but we should closely watch those meetings that are coming up on the subject.
And as we wrap up here, it's up to the school board. Would city council or the mayor's office have anything to do with what they decide?
This is a school board decision as to whether or not they stay there, whether they sell it and move into the new headquarters, purely up to those 7 members of the Duval County School Board.
The elected members of that board.
That's right.
Chris-Ann, thank you so much. Always good to talk about these issues with
Great to see you as always, Ken.
All right, well, stay with us. Florida's Agriculture Commissioner planted a seed with lawmakers. He's asking for more than $400 million ahead of the 2026 legislative session. When we come back on This Week in Jacksonville, my conversation with Wilton Simpson.
You're watching This Week in Jacksonville on Channel 4.
Agriculture Commissioner Wilton Simpson visited us here at News4JAX recently. We spoke about a variety of subjects. He was in Jacksonville along with Florida's Attorney General James Uffmeyer, speaking about the statewide crackdown on 708. Well, that's a form of kratom that's now considered a controlled substance in the state due to the potential for overdoses and serious health effects. Simpson's department has pulled nearly 18,000 of the products off store shelves statewide. One of the things Simpson discussed with me was the progress he believes is being made with the agricultural law enforcement program.
And all along, our ag law is a force multiplier with all the sheriffs in the state. We work with sheriffs all over the state, making sure on fuel thefts or consumer thefts. We've got a major announcement going to come in the next few days on a major theft ring that has been broken up. We work with the federal government. We work with ICE detainers. So all of our offices officers are 287G certified. And we're very proud of the reinforcements that we're bringing, not only local law enforcement, but working with the legislature this past year. We now have 23 interdiction stations, but we have a lot of holes in the northern border between us and Georgia, us and Alabama. And we're going to 231's a major corridor. We will have an interdiction station there in a few years. I want to thank DOT for working with us to get that accomplished. But on the other roads coming into Florida, we're going to have other pullover stations where you can pull over and we can inspect your vehicles. Because the legislature's been so generous, we're going to have x-ray machines. You know, if you go through an airport, they put your luggage through a TSA bag. We have equipment now that if you drive a semi through it, it's just like a TSA bag. And you can see all the way through. So we already find drugs, weapons, human smuggling. We find it all there doing it this way where we pull them over and we check. With that new equipment that we will have by the end of this coming year in place with the x-ray equipment, we will be able to see all the way through that truck. And so it's going to be much more difficult for people to bring illegal anything into the state of Florida.
Let's talk a little bit, shift the topic a little bit to, I guess, health. And what I see the Commissioner of Agriculture in front of me and the department talking about whole milk in schools. Why is this important, and how does that affect health for our children?
This is so important, and I think under the Obama administration is where they said that they did a rule that said you had to go to skim milk. So, you know, we started putting skim milk in our schools, and their issue then was obesity. And again, this is big government telling us how to live our lives and how to raise our children, right? President Trump has done an executive order undoing that to where we could have whole milk back in our schools. There's been a whole lot of milk wasted and thrown away in the last 8 or 10 years, however long that order was in place, because children aren't going to drink skim milk. And number two of that, there's a lot of nutritional values, amino acids and protein and stuff that go into milk and vitamins, whole milk, that kids will actually like and drink. It'll be healthier for these children. So now, and we're going to be working with the Dairy Association here coming into this, because they can't just turn on a dime, but over the coming weeks and months, I hope that all of our schools will have fresh whole milk in them. Kids will enjoy that milk. And, you know, the obesity issue is something that we take very seriously.
Yeah, we haven't gotten skinnier in these last several years, have we?
We have not, but we drank whole milk back in the 80s or in the 70s when I was in middle school and elementary school. And you know, and over time, we've developed habits like sitting on a couch and playing video games all day. We now don't go outside because we can sit at home and be on social media all day if we're kids. We can interact with our friends online. We used to have to actually go outside and see them to interact. We would go outside and play football or baseball with our friends. And so we got a lot of exercise back in those days. And of course, a lot of us had to work back in those days, real work. And sweat work. And so what I would say to us as a parent and now as a grandparent, we are responsible for our children's health. And I agree that we should do things to be more enticing to be healthy. But as a government, we should not tell our parents that we should be giving our children skim milk when they're not going to appreciate it. And I put it in the same category as fluoride. You know, last year's Farm Bill removed fluoride out of the water. And it was like, oh my God, we're going to have cavities and we're going to have tooth decay in this state. Half the population of the state never had fluoride in their water. And the statistics between the two halves were insignificant. And so when you have liberal governments and big governments that want to tell you what you have to eat, what you have to drink, or what kind of medicine you want to put in your water, you know, the free state of Florida is going to act on that. And I'm proud that President Trump has now given us the tools to clear up the milk issue.
So one of the other members of the cabinet, the chief financial officer, was in Jacksonville recently. And certainly a lot of what we're hearing from Mr. Ngolia is about Department of Government efficiency efforts. Is there something happening with your office concerning government efficiency? You
know, it was good that we got a word like Doge put out there a year ago or so. President Trump and his administration with Elon Musk and what he was doing, the Doge team. You know, I was elected to this office 2.5 years ago, and we didn't call it Doge, we call it being efficient. Yeah. And so, you know, in the last 2.5 years, we have reduced our headcount. Now, we've got 4,000 FTE, 4,000 teammates within the Department of Agriculture. We've reduced voluntarily 130 of those members. We have, I believe, won 5 efficiency awards for various things that we've done in with our team, but we're in the process now of consolidating buildings. Thanks to the legislature, we'll have most of our Tallahassee and Leon County team in one building now instead of 8 or 10 spots. And some of these buildings were built in the 30s or 40s. That one move over the next 30 years, just in efficiency of building, will save the taxpayer of the state of Florida about $50 million. It will then further allow us to reduce headcount and continue to deliver better services with fewer people. And so another example of this, we are now, when I got there, we have 20 divisions. We probably had 17 different software companies administering software throughout our Department of Agriculture. By the middle of next year, we're going to have 100% of all of them on a Microsoft-based system. All of them will be able to communicate with each other amongst divisions. All of them can better communicate with the general public now, faster services, better outcomes, fewer FTE, fewer people that we need to be able to do those jobs. So over the coming 4 or 5 years, we will probably reduce our headcount another 200 to 300 people to just because of efficiencies brought into the system. So we're very proud of our track record at the Department of Agriculture. It's something that we do ourselves. Me being as a businessman and a background before I got in the legislature, and as you know, I served in the Senate for 10 years, Senate President during COVID, we're always looking for efficiencies and effectiveness. We want to do what's right for our consumers, but at the same time, we want to be able to deliver that in an efficient manner. So it's something as a high priority for the Department of Agriculture and something we're going to continue to do.
And the Agriculture Commissioner submitted a sprawling capital improvements request of $414.75 million for fiscal year 26-27. It emphasizes land conservation, disaster resilience, water quality, and infrastructure renewal. Well, thanks for joining us today. Next time, City Council Vice President Nick Howland will be here, following up on what's ahead in the city now that there's a budget in place. We also have plans with UNF President Moez Lamam. Thanks for joining us today.
See why every day more people are choosing News4JAX, Northeast Florida and South Georgia's #1 source for local news.